The weight of a legacy isn't measured in medals or commendations. It's measured in moments. Moments that test your resolve, your dignity, your very identity. I never understood that until I stood rigid in Camp Valor's Grand Hall, every muscle locked in military attention while Captain Eric Rawlins systematically dismantled everything I'd spent my life building. I can still see him, that half smirk, tugging at his lips, my father's silver star dangling between his fingers like some cheap trinket as he addressed the entire 7th Battalion. 143 soldiers, 12 commanding officers, and General Victor Stein himself, all witness to my public execution. Lieutenant Claire Whitmore, Rawlins announced, his voice carrying across the polished marble, has been found unsuitable for advancement and command responsibilities. His eyes found mine, held them. Furthermore, the posthumous honors requested for Major Thomas Whitmore are hereby denied and redirected. The silence that followed was deafening. I felt each heartbeat like thunder in my chest as Rawlins turned, medal in hand, and presented it to his nephew, Second Lieutenant James Parker, with a smile that haunts me still. After all, he added, loud enough for everyone to hear, dead men don't need honors. In that moment, I didn't just lose my promotion. I lost my father all over again. I lost my place. I lost myself. But I held my position. Back straight, shoulders squared, chin up. Just as my father had taught me from the time I could walk. Just as I'd promised him I always would. I had no idea that, in exactly 16 minutes and 43 seconds, everything would change forever. This is that story. Dad always said there are 2 kinds of soldiers, those who serve for glory and those who serve despite it. Major Thomas Whitmore was firmly in the second category. A decorated Special Forces operator with 27 years of service, he collected accolades the way some people collect. Regrets. Reluctantly and without display. Our modest 2-bedroom house in Fort Benning had exactly 1 military photograph on display. Not my father receiving the Silver Star for the Kandahar extraction that saved 18 civilians. Not the ceremony where he was promoted to major. It was just a simple shot of his unit. Arms around each other's shoulders, dust-covered and grinning in some nameless desert. These are the medals that matter, he'd tell me, pointing to the faces of his comrades. Mom died when I was 8. Cancer moves faster than military reassignment orders, leaving just Dad and me against the world. He raised me on military precision and quiet integrity. Breakfast at Euro 600. Bed made tight enough to bounce a quarter. Homework completed before dinner. Always. Character is what you do when no one's watching, Claire Bear, he'd say, his voice gruff but gentle. And someone's always watching, even if it's just yourself. I enlisted the day after high school graduation. Dad didn't push me. In fact, he almost seemed reluctant. But military service ran in my blood. The day I earned my commission as 2nd lieutenant, I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Not just pride, but relief. Like he'd been carrying a weight I hadn't recognized until that moment. You're going to go further than I ever did, he told me at the reception afterward, his hand heavy on my shoulder. Just remember why you're doing it. I didn't understand what he meant until 3 years later, when we buried him with full military honors after a training accident in Colorado. Standing beside his flag-draped coffin, I made 2 promises. I would honor his legacy, and I would discover the truth about what happened on that mountain. The official report cited equipment failure during adverse weather conditions. But the Thomas Whitmore I knew checked his gear obsessively. He respected mountains. Something didn't add up, but my inquiries hit wall after wall of polite deflection and administrative silence, until Captain Eric Rawlins appeared in my chain of command. Our first meeting should have been a warning. I'd been at Camp Valor for 6 months when he summoned me to his office, a sparse, immaculate space with a view of the parade grounds. Lieutenant Whitmore, he said, not looking up from his desk. Thomas Whitmore's daughter. It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. Yes, sir. Rawlins finally raised his eyes to mine. Cold blue, calculating. I knew your father. We served together in Afghanistan. My heart quickened. Sir, I didn't realize. Different units, different missions. He cut me off. But his reputation preceded him. Something in his tone made my spine straighten. Major Whitmore was highly decorated, sir. Yes. Rawlins smiled without warmth. He certainly collected his share of recognition. He dismissed me shortly after, but that conversation lingered like smoke. Over the following months, I noticed patterns. My assignments grew increasingly difficult. My performance reviews, once exemplary, became riddled with minor criticisms. Training opportunities I'd requested were denied without explanation. Still, I persisted. I worked harder, longer hours, perfect execution. When the battalion's annual commendation review approached, I submitted my father's name for the Distinguished Service Cross he'd been recommended for before his death, the one that had somehow vanished into administrative limbo. Sergeant Mira Rodriguez, my closest ally at Camp Valor, warned me during our morning run. "You're poking a bear, Claire," she said, breath fogging in the dawn chill. "Rawlins has it out for you." "I'm just following procedure," I replied, pushing our pace faster. "Dad earned that cross. The mission record proves it." "Records can be interpreted different ways," Mira said carefully. "And Rawlins is the one doing the interpreting." I should have heeded her warning. Instead, I doubled down, gathering testimonials from dads, former unit members, reconstructing the timeline of the extraction mission that should have earned him the DSC. I submitted a comprehensive file that no reasonable review board could deny. What I didn't know then was that Rawlins had been the officer who denied my father's initial commendation, or that his nephew, James Parker, had been angling for a command position that my rising reputation threatened. I didn't understand that some men view honor as a zero-sum game, where recognizing another's achievement somehow diminishes their own. I discovered all this too late, standing at attention in that grand hall as Captain Rawlins not only denied my promotion but publicly humiliated my father's memory. The medal in his hand, my father's silver star, which I'd submitted for display in the battalion's memorial wall, glinted as he passed it to Parker. "Lieutenant Parker has demonstrated the kind of leadership qualities that honor our finest traditions," Rawlins announced, "unlike others who rely on family names rather than merit." The insult was clear. My face burned, but I didn't move. Didn't blink, didn't breathe. Then came the footsteps. Measured, deliberate, unmistakable, general. Victor Stein, commander of Camp Valor and decorated veteran of 3 conflicts, moved to the center of the hall. At 62, he carried himself with the rigid posture of a man half his age. His silver hair was cropped close to his skull, his uniform immaculate. "Captain Rawlins," he said, his voice quiet yet carrying to every corner of the room. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding." Rawlins straightened. "Sir?" "The commendation file," General Stein continued, extending his hand. "May I see it?" The silence stretched as Rawlins hesitated, then produced the folder from beneath his arm. The general opened it, scanned the contents, and raised his eyes to meet mine. "Lieutenant Whitmore," he said, "your father was Major Thomas James Whitmore, 5th Special Forces Group, correct?" "Yes, sir," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. General Stein turned back to Rawlins. "Captain, perhaps you'd like to explain why you've denied a Distinguished Service Cross recommendation that carries my personal endorsement?" The hall collectively held its breath, and in that moment I realized this wasn't just about a medal or a promotion. It was about truth, about justice, about what happens when someone finally watches. "General Stein, there must be some mistake." Captain Rawlins' voice had lost its edge of authority, taking on a placating tone that made my stomach turn. The recommendation was incomplete, the documentation insufficient. The general's weathered face remained impassive as he leafed through the file, the same file I had meticulously compiled over months. "Insufficient?" he repeated, his voice dangerously soft. 3 eyewitness testimonials, official mission reports, and a congressional inquiry finding, all supporting evidence for an action that saved 18 civilians and 6 operatives under heavy fire. The hall remained frozen. Even the air conditioning seemed to have hushed its constant hum. "Sir, Rawlins began, but the general silenced him with a raised hand. "Furthermore," General Stein continued, "I find Lieutenant Parker's name listed as the secondary recipient. Curious, considering he wasn't present during the Kandahar operation. In fact, he wasn't even enlisted at that time." My eyes drifted to Lieutenant Parker, who had gone pale beneath his tan. The silver star in his hands, my father's silver star, looked suddenly heavy, as if its weight had multiplied tenfold. "An administrative error," Rawlins attempted, sweat now visible at his temples despite the hall's climate control. "In the process of updating records don't update themselves, Captain." The steel in Stein's voice could have cut through armor plating. He closed the file with a deliberate motion and turned to address the assembled battalion. "This ceremony is temporarily suspended. Captain Rawlins, Lieutenant Parker, and Lieutenant Whitmore will report to my office immediately. The rest of you are dismissed." The collective exhale was audible as soldiers began filing out, murmurs rising like a tide. I caught Mira's eye as she passed. Her expression mixed sympathy with something like vindication. She gave me the smallest of nods before disappearing with the others. The walk to General Stein's office was the longest of my life. We moved in silence, Stein leading, Rawlins and Parker behind him, and me bringing up the rear. My mind raced through scenarios, each more improbable than the last. I'd spent so long fighting for mere acknowledgement that I couldn't quite grasp that someone with real authority, was finally listening. General Stein's office was exactly what you'd expect from a career military man. Functional, orderly, with only the barest personal touches. A worn photograph of a younger Stein with what I assumed was his family. A rock paperweight. A display case of service medals that made no attempt at ostentation. "Sit," he ordered, gesturing to the 3 chairs facing his desk. We obeyed. Rawlins sat, rigidly, while Parker seemed to be trying to make himself physically smaller. I perched on the edge of my seat, hands clasped in my lap, preparing for battle. "Lieutenant Parker," Stein began once seated behind his desk. "Please place Major Whitmore's silver star on my desk." Parker complied immediately, relief evident in the quickness of his movement. "Now," the general continued, "I want to understand exactly how this situation developed. Lieutenant Whitmore, since this concerns your father's commendation, would you care to begin?" I took a deep breath, centering myself. This wasn't about emotion, it was about facts. "Sir, following my father's death 3 years ago, I discovered that he had been recommended for the Distinguished Service Cross for the Kandahar extraction. That recommendation was never processed. When I joined this battalion and learned about the Memorial Wall project, I submitted both the DSC recommendation and my father's existing Silver Star for inclusion." "And the response?" Stein prompted. "Initial approval, sir, followed by silence. When I inquired, I was informed that the matter was under review. Until today, when Captain Rawlins announced both the rejection and the reassignment of my father's Silver Star to Lieutenant Parker." Stein's gaze shifted to Rawlins. "Captain?" Rawlins had recovered some of his composure, but a muscle twitched in his jaw as he spoke. "General, with all due respect, Major Whitmore's actions, while commendable, were part of a joint operation. The individual recognition recommended was disproportionate to his actual contribution." The words hit me like physical blows. I gripped the edges of my chair to keep from responding. "You were there?" Stein asked Rawlins. "No, sir, but you reviewed the classified mission reports?" "I had access to the summary. Yet you felt qualified to overrule a recommendation from the field commander and the subsequent congressional review?" Stein's voice remained level, but each question landed with precision. "And then decided to reassign an existing decoration to your nephew. Lieutenant Parker, what's your understanding of why you received Major Whitmore's Silver Star today?" Parker swallowed visibly. "Sir, I was told it was a recognition of family service tradition. That since Major Whitmore was deceased, the medal could be repurposed as an inspirational symbol." "Repurposed?" Stein repeated, the word hanging in the air like a grenade with its pin removed. "Captain Rawlins, are you familiar with Article 106 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice?" Rawlins stiffened further, if that was possible. "Yes, sir." "Then you understand that what you've done constitutes falsification of official records, misappropriation of military honors, and abuse of authority." Stein leaned forward slightly. "Not to mention a profound dishonor to a fallen soldier." The silence that followed was absolute. "Lieutenant Parker," Stein finally said, "you're dismissed. We'll address your participation in this matter separately." Parker practically bolted from the chair, offering a hasty salute before fleeing the office. The door closed behind him with a soft click that somehow emphasized the tension rather than breaking it. "Lieutenant Whitmore," Stein continued once we were 3 instead of 4, "I've been reviewing your service record. Exemplary performance consistently noted by everyone except Captain Rawlins. Interesting pattern." I remained silent, uncertain where this was heading. "There's something else you should know," the general said, opening a drawer and withdrawing another file, older, with a classified stamp across its cover. "I served with your father in Kosovo before you were born. He saved my life and never mentioned it in any report. That was the kind of man Thomas Whitmore was." My throat tightened unexpectedly. Dad had rarely spoken of his deployments and never as heroics. "Sir," Rawlins interjected, "I wasn't aware of your personal connection to this situation. Perhaps I should recuse." "This isn't about personal connections, Captain." Stein cut him off. "It's about integrity." something Major Whitmore understood better than most. He turned back to me. Lieutenant, would you excuse us? I need to speak with Captain Rawlins privately. Of course, sir, I replied, rising and offering a precise salute before exiting. Outside, I found the hallway deserted except for Mira, who was ostensibly organizing files at a nearby desk. She abandoned all pretense when she saw me. Well? She demanded in a hushed voice. What happened? Before I could answer, the door behind me opened again. General Stein appeared, his expression grave. Lieutenant Whitmore, please wait here. I need to make some calls, and then we'll continue our discussion. He paused, then added, Your father was a good man, one of the best I've served with. Thank you, sir, I managed, emotion threatening to crack my composure. After he disappeared down the hallway, Mira grabbed my arm. Claire, do you realize what's happening? This is big, really big. I nodded, still processing. Did you know? About Dad and General Stein? No one knew, she replied. But that explains why Rawlins looks like he's about to face a firing squad. He picked the wrong officer to mess with. From inside the office, Rawlins's voice rose briefly before subsiding again. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakably defensive, even desperate. What do you think will happen? I asked quietly. Mira's expression turned grim. Best case for him? Forced retirement? Worst case? Court-martial. She squeezed my arm. Either way, he's finished, and Claire... She hesitated. What? Your father's reputation will be restored. That's what matters, right? I nodded again, but something uncomfortable settled in my chest. Vindication should have felt triumphant. Instead, it felt hollow, like winning a battle but recognizing the war had exacted too high a cost from everyone involved. Right, I finally said. That's what matters. But as I stood there waiting, watching the afternoon light shift through the hallway windows, I couldn't help wondering, would Dad have wanted this? A public reckoning. Careers destroyed. The very kind of attention he'd always avoided. I had no answers. Only questions and the growing realization that honor was far more complicated than I'd ever understood. 3 days after what the base had taken to calling the medal incident, I found myself sitting across from General Stein once more. The intervening time had passed in a blur of debriefings, signed statements, and whispered conversations that ceased the moment I entered rooms. At ease, Lieutenant, Stein said as I maintained my rigid posture. This isn't a formal meeting. I relaxed marginally, my hands moving from my sides to rest on my lap. Thank you for seeing me, sir. I think we're past formalities given the circumstances. He gestured to a silver coffee service on his desk. Coffee? Yes, sir. Black, please. As he poured 2 cups, I took the opportunity to study him more carefully. The lines around his eyes seemed deeper than they had been during our confrontation with Rawlins, his shoulders heavier beneath the pressed uniform. Captain Rawlins has been relieved of duty pending investigation, Stein said without preamble, sliding a cup toward me. He'll face administrative discipline at minimum, possibly criminal charges depending on what the full audit reveals. I accepted the coffee but didn't drink. And Lieutenant Parker? Reassigned to Fort Irwin with a formal reprimand. His involvement appears limited to accepting what his uncle arranged, though his judgment was severely lacking. I nodded, absorbing this information. It should have felt like victory. That's not why I asked to see you, though, I said after a moment. Stein raised an eyebrow. I figured as much. What's on your mind, Whitmore? My father's death, sir. The words emerged steadier than I expected. The official report never made sense to me. Now that I know about Captain Rawlins' willingness to manipulate records, understanding dawned in Stein's eyes. He set his coffee down untouched. You think Rawlins had something to do with the training accident? I think it's a remarkable coincidence that the officer who blocked my father's DSC is the same one who tried to erase his legacy entirely. I leaned forward slightly. Sir, my father checked his equipment religiously. He respected mountains. He wouldn't have made the mistakes described in that report. Stein's expression turned guarded. What are you asking for, Lieutenant? A reopening of the investigation. Access to the unredacted reports. The truth, sir. Theo. Silence stretched between us, broken only by the distant sounds of the base going about its daily business. Finally, Stein sighed, reaching for a photograph on his desk. He turned it to face me. This was taken in Kosovo, 1999. Your father is third from the left. I stared at the image, hungry for this glimpse of Dad I'd never seen. He looked younger, of course, but with the same steady gaze I remembered. He stood slightly apart from the group, watching rather than posing. He saved my life during an ambush, Stein continued, Carried me 3 kilometers with a bullet in his own shoulder. Never mentioned it in his report. When I tried to recommend him for a Bronze Star, he asked me not to. I looked up, confused. Why would he do that? Because Thomas Whitmore believed actions should speak for themselves. Stein reclaimed the photograph, his fingers lingering on the image. He used to say that medals were just weight. They either pulled you up through others' expectations or dragged you down with pride. That sounds like him, I admitted, a painful knot forming in my throat. I respected your father immensely, Lieutenant, which is why I need to ask, what do you hope to achieve? By reopening his case? The question caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on the fight that I hadn't fully considered the end point. Justice, I said finally. Closure. And if the investigation reveals nothing new? If the accident was exactly what the report described? Then I'll accept it, I replied, though even as I spoke, I wasn't entirely sure that was true. Stein studied me with an intensity that made me want to squirm. Very well. I'll authorize limited access to the investigation files. But Whitmore, he paused. This stays between us until there's something concrete. The last thing your father would have wanted is his name becoming the center of base gossip. Understood, sir. Thank you. As I rose to leave, Stein added, one more thing. The Distinguished Service Cross. Recommendation has been reinstated. The ceremony will be next month, if that suits you. Emotion threatened to overwhelm me. I managed a nod and a, thank you, sir, before making my exit, maintaining composure until I reached the privacy of my quarters. Only then did I allow the tears to come. For Dad, for the years spent questioning, for the bittersweet taste of vindication that came too late for him to witness. The investigation files arrived on a Tuesday morning, 3 sealed boxes delivered to a secure room in the administrative building. Sergeant Rodriguez had been assigned to assist me, partly because of her clearance level and partly, I suspected, because General Stein thought I needed an ally. Where do we start? Mira asked as we surveyed the contents. Hundreds of pages of reports, photographs, equipment analyses, and witness statements spread across the metal table. Chronologically, I decided, reaching for the initial incident report. We need to understand exactly what they think happened before we can see where it doesn't add up. The official narrative was straightforward. A 4-man training exercise in the Colorado Rockies, routine rappelling drill on the north face of Mount Wilson, unexpected weather system moving in, equipment failure. Major Thomas Whitmore falls 210 feet to his death. The other 3 team members, Captain Michael Jennings, Lieutenant Scott Harris, and Specialist David Chen, unable to reach him due to deteriorating conditions. Body recovered 8 hours later. I read aloud, my voice clinical to mask the pain. Cause of death, massive trauma, consistent with high-altitude fall. Mira watched me carefully. You okay? Fine, I replied automatically, already reaching for the equipment analysis. We worked methodically through that first day, creating timelines, cross-referencing statements, flagging inconsistencies. By evening, my eyes burned from reading, and my head throbbed with details that refused to coalesce into anything meaningful. We should continue tomorrow, Mira suggested gently as I rubbed my temples. I shook my head. Just a little longer. There's something here about the anchor points I want to check against the equipment inventory. She sighed but settled back in her chair. You're as stubborn as they say your father was. That made me smile despite my fatigue. Who says that? Chen, David Chen, he transferred to our logistics division last year. I froze, papers halfway to a folder. Specialist Chen? From the accident? He's here at Camp Valor? Mira nodded slowly. Yeah, didn't you know? No. I breathed, mind racing. No, I had no idea. You want me to arrange a meeting? I hesitated. Reading clinical reports was one thing. Facing someone who had witnessed my father's death, who might have been the last person to see him alive, was another entirely. Yes, I finally said, as soon as possible. David Chen agreed to meet the following evening at the officers' mess, after most dinner crowds had dispersed. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe 30, with watchful eyes and the compact build of someone who spent serious time in the gym. Lieutenant Whitmore, he greeted me, extending his hand. I've been hoping to meet you since I transferred here, but it never seemed appropriate to approach you. I shook his hand firmly. Thank you for agreeing to talk to me, Specialist. It's Sergeant now, he corrected with a small smile that didn't reach his eyes. Let's sit. We claimed a corner table with mugs of coffee neither of us seemed interested in drinking. Chen, David, sat with military precision, his gaze drifting occasionally to the exits as if mapping escape routes. "You're investigating your father's accident," he said after an uncomfortable silence. Not a question. "Yes, with General Stein's authorization." Chen nodded slowly. "I figured this day would come eventually. The official report never sat right with you, did it? Did it sit right with you?" I countered. His eyes met mine directly for the first time. "No." The single word hung between us, charged with implications. "Tell me what really happened," I said quietly. Chen glanced around the nearly empty mess hall before leaning forward. "What's in the report isn't entirely false. We were on a training exercise. Weather did move in unexpectedly. Your father did fall." He paused. "But the equipment didn't fail. Thomas Whitmore didn't make mistakes like that." My heart raced. "Then what happened?" "The anchor points were tampered with." His voice dropped further. "Not enough to be obvious, just enough to fail under stress. Someone filed halfway through the main support carabiner. The floor seemed to shift beneath my feet." "You're saying it wasn't an accident?" "I'm saying I examined that equipment afterward, and what I saw wasn't consistent with natural wear or stress failure." Chen's fingers tightened around his mug. "I included it in my initial statement, but that detail didn't make it into the final report." "Who took your statement?" I already knew the answer before he spoke. "Captain Eric Rawlins. He was leading the investigation team." Of course. The pieces were falling into place now, forming a picture so ugly I almost wished for ignorance again. "Did you confront him about it?" Chen's bitter laugh was answer enough. "I was a specialist with a GED questioning a captain with political connections. Within a week, I was transferred to a supply depot in Alaska. Took me 3 years to work my way back to a decent posting." "And the others? Jennings and Harris?" "Jennings retired 8 months later. Harris transferred to intelligence. I haven't spoken to either since the funeral." I processed this information, trying to maintain my composure. Why would Rawlins cover up evidence of tampering? What possible motive? "Your father was being considered for promotion to lieutenant colonel," Chen interrupted. "A position Rawlins had been angling for. And there was the Kandahar situation." "Kandahar?" I echoed, confused by the sudden shift. Chen's expression darkened. "Rawlins was originally assigned to lead that extraction operation, but he was pulled at the last minute and your father took command instead. The success made headlines back home while Rawlins was sidelined. He never forgave your father for that." The revelation struck me like a physical blow. Professional jealousy and a thwarted promotion, these were the reasons my father had died? It seemed simultaneously too monstrous and too petty to comprehend. "I need proof," I said finally, my voice steadier than I felt. "Your testimony is valuable, but after all this time..." Chen reached into his pocket and withdrew a small flash drive. "I've been waiting for someone to ask the right questions. This contains photos I took of the equipment before it was processed as evidence, plus copies of my original unedited statement." I stared at the drive, suddenly afraid of what it represented. "You kept this all these years?" "Your father was a good man and an exceptional officer," Chen said simply. "He deserved better than what happened to him, and better than the official record shows." As I reached for the drive, his hand closed over mine briefly. "Lieutenant Whitmore, be careful. Rawlins may be suspended, but he still has allies, people who benefited from your father's removal." "I understand," I assured him, though in truth I wasn't sure I did. The scope of what Chen was suggesting, a conspiracy, a cover-up, perhaps even murder, felt overwhelming. "There's one more thing you should know," Chen added as I pocketed the drive. "The day before the accident, I overheard your father arguing with someone on the phone. He said, 'I won't be intimidated into silence. The report goes to the general on Monday, with or without your cooperation.'" My breath caught. He was preparing a report? I don't know what about, but whatever it was, he never got the chance to deliver it. The implications settled over me like a shroud. Not just professional rivalry then, something more. Something my father had discovered. Something worth killing to keep hidden. As Chen and I parted ways, the drive heavy in my pocket, I felt a shift within myself. The daughter seeking closure was receding, replaced by the officer pursuing justice. No longer just for my father, but for the integrity of the institution he had dedicated his life to. "Thank you, Sergeant Chen," I said as we reached the exit. "I won't forget this." His smile was grim. "Neither will they, when this comes to light." He saluted sharply. "Good hunting, Lieutenant." I returned the salute, already mentally planning my next steps. The drive would need verification. I'd need to track down Jennings and Harris. And somewhere, if Chen was right, There might be a report my father had prepared, evidence of whatever he had discovered that had ultimately cost him his life. What had started as a quest for personal vindication had transformed into something far larger and more dangerous. I just hoped I was equal to the task. General Stein's reaction to Chen's flash drive was controlled fury, a cold, methodical anger that manifested in precise movements and clipped speech as he reviewed the evidence on a secure terminal. This equipment was certified by 3 different inspectors before your father's team deployed, he noted, enlarging an image of the compromised carabiner. The filing marks are unmistakable. I stood at parade rest beside his desk, watching the images cycle across the screen. Sergeant Chen believes it was deliberate sabotage, sir. And you? Stein's sharp gaze shifted to me. What do you believe, Lieutenant? I believe the evidence supports his assessment. Combined with Rawlins' pattern of behavior regarding my father's commendations and the timing of the incident relative to Dad's pending promotion, circumstantial, Stein said, though not dismissively. Compelling, but circumstantial. Yes, sir. He leaned back, eyes still on the screen. Do you know why I authorized your investigation, Claire? The use of my first name startled me. I assumed because of your history with my father. Partly, he acknowledged. But also because 3 months ago, Internal Affairs flagged unusual financial activity in Rawlins' accounts. Nothing conclusive, but enough to warrant monitoring. My pulse quickened. Financial activity? Payments from a shell corporation linked to defense contractor Geotech Industries, the same contractor that lost a major security bid after your father's assessment team recommended against them. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Dad was investigating contract fraud. Potentially, Stein cautioned. We never found the report Chen mentioned, but the timing aligns with Geotech's disqualification from a $40 million security contract for Camp Valor and 3 other installations. $40 million. More than enough motive for what had happened on that mountain. What do we do now, sir? Stein shut down the terminal with deliberate care. Now, Lieutenant, we proceed carefully, very carefully. Chen's evidence reopens your father's case, but we need more before we can move against Rawlins and whoever else might be involved. Harris and Jennings, I suggested. The other witnesses. Precisely. I'll arrange for you to speak with them, officially this time. And we need to find that report your father was preparing. If it even exists, I cautioned, not wanting to build hopes on Chen's overheard conversation. Thomas Whitmore was methodical to a fault, Stein said with the ghost of a smile. If he was compiling evidence of contractor fraud, he would have kept backups. Multiple backups. That sparked a memory. Dad at our kitchen table late at night. Files spread around him as he worked. Always have insurance, Claire Bear, he'd say. Information is only valuable if it survives. His personal effects, I said suddenly. After the funeral, I packed everything into storage. I never went through his papers thoroughly. It was too painful then. Stein nodded briskly. Start there. I'll work on locating Harris and Jennings. He rose, signaling our meeting was concluding. Lieutenant, I shouldn't have to emphasize the sensitivity of this investigation. No, sir. Trust no one. Outside this room until we have concrete proof. Even Sergeant Rodriguez. That gave me pause. Sir, with respect, Mira has been instrumental in... I don't question her loyalty, Stein interrupted. But the fewer people who know the full scope of what we're investigating, the safer all of you will be. If Rawlins orchestrated your father's death to protect a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme, he won't hesitate to eliminate other threats. The warning sent ice through my veins. Until that moment, I hadn't fully processed the personal danger this investigation might entail. Understood, sir. I managed. I'll be discreet. See that you are. Dismissed. I saluted and turned to leave, but Stein called after me just as I reached the door. Lieutenant Whitmore. His voice had softened almost imperceptibly. Your father would be proud of your persistence, but he would want you safe above all else. Remember that. Yes, sir, I replied, throat suddenly tight. I will. The storage unit was exactly as I'd left it 3 years earlier. A climate-controlled space filled with neatly labeled boxes containing the remnants of Major Thomas Whitmore's life. Civilian clothes he rarely wore. Books. On military history and mountaineering. Kitchenware from our small family home near Fort Benning. And in the back corner, 5 bankers' boxes marked simply Office. I started methodically, creating an inventory of each box's contents as I searched. Financial records, service evaluations, training certificates, nothing that screamed evidence of contractor fraud. But then, Dad wouldn't have labeled it so obviously. 4 hours in, fatigue beginning to cloud my focus. I almost missed it. A battered copy of For Whom the Bell Tolls, tucked between tax returns and insurance policies. It seemed out of place among the administrative documents. I opened it, curious why it had been filed here rather than with his other books. The inside cover bore his familiar handwriting. To remind us why. Integrity matters. TW. As I flipped through, a small key taped to the final page caught my attention. A safe deposit key, unmarked except for a series of numbers etched into the metal. 7/21/99, July 21st, 1999. The date meant nothing to me immediately, but something about it nagged at my memory. I photographed the key with my phone and continued searching, more focused now. If there was a key, there might be information about what it opened. In the final box, beneath folders of family photographs, I found a worn leather journal I'd never seen before. Inside, instead of personal reflections, were cryptic notations, dates, locations, and alphanumeric codes that meant nothing to me. Until I reached an entry dated 3 weeks before his death. Geotech audit complete. Discrepancies. Documented and archived. BOE Dagger 7728. Access code Kosovo Echo Delta. Backup with VS if necessary. VS Victor Stein. My hands trembled slightly as I closed the journal. Bank of America, Box 7728. The safe deposit key. And suddenly the date made sense. Kosovo, 1999, when my father had saved General Stein's life. I'd found my father's insurance policy. Bank of America's downtown branch manager was understandably hesitant when I requested access to a safe deposit box that had sat undisturbed for 3 years. Even with my military ID, the death certificate, and proof I was the sole beneficiary of my father's estate, there were forms to complete, verification calls to make. This is highly unusual, Lieutenant Whitmore, the manager explained as we waited for final approval. Normally, safe deposit boxes are sealed upon death until probate is complete. My father's estate went through simplified probate, I replied, maintaining a calm I didn't entirely feel. All assets were transferred to me as his only heir. What I didn't say was that I'd had no idea this box existed until yesterday, that whatever it contained might be worth killing for, that even now I was hyper-aware of every person entering the bank, every car that lingered too long outside. Finally, the approval came through. The manager led me to a private room where the box, longer and deeper than I'd expected, awaited. Take all the time you need, she said before closing the door. For a moment, I just stared at it. This was the last piece of my father I'd never encountered. His final message, perhaps. With steady hands, I inserted the key and lifted the lid. Inside were 3 items: a sealed manila envelope, a small digital recorder, and a flash drive secured in a protective case, all labeled with the same precise handwriting: insurance. I began with the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter, dated 2 days before my father's death. Claire, if you're reading this, something has happened to me. I pray. It's simply old age, but given recent events, I must prepare for other possibilities. The enclosed evidence documents a systematic fraud scheme involving Geotech Industries, several high-ranking officers, and millions in defense contracts. I've discovered falsified safety certifications, bribery of inspection officials, and substandard materials used in critical infrastructure projects at 4 military installations, including Camp Valor. The danger isn't just financial, lives are at risk. The barracks renovations at Camp Valor used substandard fire suppression systems. The perimeter security technology fails regularly in extreme weather. These compromises were intentionally concealed from oversight committees. I've compiled irrefutable evidence, included here and in a parallel file, delivered to General Victor Stein. Trust him. He's one of the few whose integrity remains unimpeachable. Captain Eric Rawlins is deeply implicated. When confronted, he threatened both my career and my life. If something happens to me, look to him first. I'm sorry to leave you with this burden, Claire Bear. You have always been my greatest pride. Know that whatever happens, I faced it with the same courage and integrity I've tried to instill in you. All my love, Dad. My vision blurred as I finished reading. I carefully set the letter aside and picked up the recorder with trembling hands. Pressing play, I heard my father's voice for the first time in 3 years. October 12th, meeting with Rawlins in his office. Dad's voice began, steady and professional. What followed was a clearly recorded conversation that started as a professional disagreement and devolved into explicit threats. You have no idea who you're dealing with, Rawlins' voice snarled toward the end. This goes higher than you can imagine. Back off now, or I promise you won't live to regret it. Is that a threat, Captain? My father's voice remained calm. Consider it a final warning. From a friend. The recording ended. There. I sat motionless, the recorder still in my hand, as the full reality settled over me. Not just corruption or fraud, but a premeditated murder, carefully disguised as an accident. And proof, undeniable proof, in my father's own voice. With shaking hands, I gathered everything back into the box. This evidence needed to go directly to General Stein. No copies, no stops along the way. Just as my father had intended. He recorded everything, I told Stein later that afternoon, sliding the flash drive across his desk. Every meeting, every inspection, every discrepancy. The evidence is comprehensive. The general inserted the drive into his secure terminal, expression grave, as he scanned the contents. Your father was building a RICO case, organized crime charges against a defense, contractor and multiple military personnel, including Rawlins, and 2 colonels, a brigadier general, and the CEO of Geotech. Stein's face hardened as he continued reading. The scope is considerable. What happens now? I asked, acutely aware that we were dealing with powerful people who had already demonstrated their willingness to kill. Stein was silent for a long moment. Still, scrolling through documents. Now we move this up the chain, directly to the Department of Defense Inspector General and the FBI. This is beyond internal military justice. And Rawlins, the others involved, will be detained immediately once the warrants come through. He looked up from the screen, his expression softening slightly. You've done well, Lieutenant. Your father would be proud. The words should have brought comfort. Instead, a cold knot of apprehension formed in my stomach. Sir, I've been thinking, if Rawlins killed my father over this, and he has connections as high up as a brigadier general, you're concerned about your safety. It wasn't a question. And yours, I admitted. We're dealing with people who've already committed murder to protect this scheme. Stein closed the files and removed the drive, securing it in his desk. Which is why we need to move quickly and carefully. I've arranged a secure transport for you to Washington tomorrow morning. You'll personally deliver copies of this evidence to the Inspector General while I coordinate with FBI field offices here. The plan made sense, but something still felt wrong. A persistent unease I couldn't shake. What about Harris and Jennings? I asked. The other witnesses from my father's accident. Still being located, Stein replied, a flicker of frustration crossing his features. Harris is on assignment overseas. Jennings seems to have dropped off the grid after retirement. That didn't sound right. Military retirees didn't simply drop off the grid. They had pensions, medical benefits, administrative ties that remained even after service, unless they had reason to disappear. Sir, I began carefully, what if they were silenced too, or bought off? It's a possibility we have to consider, he acknowledged, which is why securing this evidence and getting federal authorities involved is our priority. Once the investigation is official, witnesses will be compelled to cooperate. I nodded, though the unease persisted. What time tomorrow? 0600, a secure vehicle will pick you up from your quarters. Pack light, travel under the radar, no communications about this to anyone. Stein rose, indicating our meeting was concluding. Get some rest, Lieutenant. Tomorrow will be a long day. I saluted and turned to leave, my mind already racing through preparations. As I reached the IDI door, Stein added, And Claire? Your father chose well, trusting you with this. Not many officers would have pursued the truth so doggedly. He was my father, I said simply. I owed him that much. Back in my quarters, I packed efficiently. Enough for 3 days in Washington, nothing that would draw attention. My service weapon, cleaned and loaded. The letter from my father, secured in an inner pocket. The digital recorder as backup. As darkness fell, I found myself standing at my window, watching the familiar rhythm of evening activities across Camp Valor. Soldiers returning from the day's duties. Security patrols making their rounds. The flag being lowered for the night. Everything appeared normal, yet nothing felt normal anymore. The base I'd called home for nearly a year now seemed filled with shadows, potential threats lurking in familiar corners. How many of these people I passed daily were involved? How deep did the corruption run? My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Need to talk. Not secure on base. Usual running spot, 2200. Important. Mira. Using an unknown number suggested she was being cautious. Our usual running spot was a quiet stretch along the base's eastern perimeter, secluded but not isolated enough to be suspicious. I debated whether to go. Stein had emphasized discretion, limiting those who knew about the investigation. But Mira had been involved from the beginning, had helped me access the files that started this journey. Decision made, I changed into running clothes, tucked my sidearm into a concealed holster, and headed out. Whatever Mira had discovered, it might be crucial before I left for Washington. The night air was cool against my skin as I jogged toward our meeting point, my senses hyper-alert to every shadow, every sound. As I rounded the corner near the eastern fence line, I spotted a solitary figure already waiting, Mira's distinctive silhouette unmistakable even in the dim light. "You came," she said as I approached, her voice tight with tension. "What's going on?" I asked, automatically scanning our surroundings. We appeared to be alone. "I found something you need to see." She pulled out her phone, fingers tapping rapidly. "Harris is dead. Car accident in Germany 3 weeks ago. And Jennings?" Her eyes met mine, grim in the moonlight. "Suicide, apparently. 2 months after your father's death." My blood ran cold. "They're cleaning house." "It gets worse." She turned the phone toward me, displaying what looked like financial records. "I've been tracking Rawlins' communications since he was suspended. These transfers came through yesterday, $50,000 each to 3 different accounts. One belongs to a private security contractor who used to work for Geotech. Hitmen," I breathed. "The pieces, falling into terrible place. They know we have the evidence. They're trying to contain the situation." Mira nodded grimly. "We need to move now, not tomorrow. Tonight." She was right. Waiting until morning might be too late. If Rawlins had already activated hired guns, the secure transport Stein had arranged could be compromised. "I need to warn the general," I said, already turning back toward the administrative buildings. Mira caught my arm. "Wait. There's one more thing." Her expression was pained. "I think someone high up at Camp Valor is involved. Someone helping coordinate their response." "Who?" The hesitation in her eyes told me everything before she spoke. "Financial records show regular payments to an offshore account linked to VS Consulting. VS Victor Stein." My mind refused to process what Mira was suggesting. General Stein, my father's friend, the man who had championed his legacy, who had authorized my investigation, couldn't possibly be part of this. "That's impossible," I said, taking an involuntary step back. "He served with my father. He's been helping me investigate. He has the evidence right now, which makes him perfectly positioned to control what happens." "Next," Mira countered gently. "Claire, I didn't want to believe it either, but the transfers are there." She swiped to another screen. "Monthly payments dating back 5 years, all to the same shell corporation." "It could be legitimate consulting work," I argued, though doubt had already taken root. "Or someone using his initials to throw us off track." "Maybe," Mira conceded. "But can we risk assuming that? If I'm wrong, we apologize later. If I'm right and you walk into his trap tomorrow morning..." She didn't need to finish the thought. If Stein was involved, the secure transport to Washington could be my father's fate repeating itself. "What's your plan?" I asked, mind racing through implications, contingencies. "I have a contact in the FBI field office in Denver. Someone I trust. Completely. We bypass the chain of command, take the evidence directly to her. Tonight." It made sense, yet something still felt wrong. The timing. The sudden revelations. "How did you find all this?" "Financial records, offshore accounts. That's not exactly standard access for a sergeant." Mira's expression shifted, almost imperceptibly. "I have skills from before I enlisted. Let's leave it at that." The evasion raised my guard further. "And this FBI contact? How do I know they're not compromised too?" "You don't," she admitted. "You can only trust me. And right now, I'm the only one not asking you to hand over evidence and get into a mysterious vehicle." She had a point. Every instinct told me to be cautious, to trust no one, but my options were limited. Stay at Camp Valor, where multiple conspirators might be operating, or leave with Mira for Denver, risking betrayal but at least moving the evidence away from those I knew were involved. "I need the evidence first," I decided. "It's in Stein's office." "Too risky," Mira countered immediately. "If he's involved, it could be a trap." "I have backups," I assured her, thinking of my father's recorded conversation still secured, in my inner pocket. "But the complete files are worth retrieving if possible. Stein usually leaves by 2100. The office should be empty." Mira checked her watch, 21:47. "Security patrols?" "Every 30 minutes along the administrative corridor. We'd have a window." She studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay, But we move fast, and at the first sign of trouble, we abort and head straight to Denver with what we have. Agreed. We jogged back toward the main buildings, now mostly darkened as the base settled into night operations. The administrative building housed not just Stein's office, but the command center and various departmental headquarters. At this hour, it would be minimally staffed. Security personnel, night duty officers, perhaps a few workaholics finishing reports. We slowed as we approached, adopting the casual pace of soldiers completing an evening run. The front entrance was clearly visible, a guard stationed at the security desk inside. Side entrance, I murmured as we passed without breaking stride. Maintenance access near the east wing. Mira nodded almost imperceptibly, keeping pace as we circled the building. The maintenance door required a keycard, but as a battalion officer, mine had the necessary clearance. I swiped it, breath held until the light flashed green. Inside, the service corridor was dimly lit and deserted. We moved silently, alert for any sound that might indicate security personnel. The route to Stein's office was longer this way, but avoided the main hallways with their cameras and regular patrols. Almost there, I whispered, as we reached the executive wing. Most offices were dark, but light spilled from beneath one door midway down the corridor. Stein's office. He hadn't left yet. I signaled Mira to hold position as I edged forward, straining to hear any voices or movement. The corridor remained silent, except for the soft hum of the building's climate control system. Cautiously, I approached the door, positioning myself to peer through the narrow gap between frame and hinges. What I saw froze my blood. General Stein was indeed still there, seated at his desk. But he wasn't alone. Captain Eric Rawlins, supposedly suspended and under investigation, stood before him, their heads bent together over what appeared to be my father's evidence files. The daughter becomes as troublesome as the father, Rawlins was saying, his back to the door. We should have dealt with her months ago. She was useful, Stein replied, his voice carrying the same authoritative tone I'd always respected. She led us straight to Thomas's insurance policy. Now that we have it, the Washington problem is solved. And tomorrow's transport? We'll proceed as planned. A regrettable accident on an isolated stretch of highway. Tragic, but these things happen to officers who don't know when to stop asking questions. My father's voice echoed in my memory. Always have insurance, Claire Bear. Information is only valuable if it survives. He'd been right. And now I understood why he'd left copies with both me and Stein. He hadn't known which of them might be compromised. He was hedging his bets, ensuring the truth would eventually emerge. I eased back from the door, heart pounding as I returned to Mira. You were right, I whispered. Stein and Rawlins together. They're planning to eliminate me during tomorrow's transport. Her expression hardened. We need to move. Now. Forget the files. We go with what we have. As we turned to retrace our steps, a voice called out behind us. Lieutenant Whitmore? Is that you? I froze, recognizing the voice of Major Hayes, Stein's executive officer. I turned slowly, forcing my features into neutral surprise. Yes, sir. Just finishing an evening run. Hayes approached, his expression puzzled as he took in our presence in the executive wing. At this hour? And in this section of the building? We were looking for Captain Reynolds, sir, Mira interjected smoothly. Lieutenant Whitmore needs his signature on transfer papers before tomorrow's assignment. Hayes frowned. Reynolds left hours ago. And what assignment? I don't recall any transfers in this morning's briefing. Before either of us could respond, the door to Stein's office opened. The general himself appeared, his imposing figure silhouetted against the light from his office. Major Hayes, is there a problem? His gaze shifted to us, his expression unreadable. Lieutenant Whitmore, Sergeant Rodriguez, this is unexpected. The moment stretched, taut with unspoken danger. I could see Rawlins moving in the office behind him, likely securing the evidence we'd come for. Just looking for Captain Reynolds, sir. I repeated Mira's excuse, keeping my voice steady through sheer force of will. But it seems we've missed him. Indeed. Stein's eyes narrowed slightly. Though I'm curious why you'd need Reynolds at this hour, especially when your transport to Washington leaves so early tomorrow. Last-minute administrative details, sir, I replied, maintaining eye contact despite the cold fear creeping up my spine. I see. He studied us for another long moment, then stepped aside. Major Hayes, would you escort our night owls back to the main entrance? It seems they've taken a wrong turn. Of course, sir, Hayes replied, gesturing for us to precede him down the corridor. As we moved past Stein's doorway, I caught a glimpse of Rawlins watching us, his expression calculating. He knew. They both knew. The walk to the main entrance with Hayes was excruciating. Every step measured. Every casual comment carefully crafted to project normalcy. When we finally exited the building, the night air felt like freedom. "Appreciate the escort, sir," I said to Hayes, offering a regulation salute. "Won't happen again." He returned the salute with a puzzled expression. "See that it doesn't, Lieutenant. These areas are restricted after hours for a reason." We maintained our composure until Hayes disappeared back inside. Then, by unspoken agreement, we began jogging. Not toward the barracks, but toward the base perimeter. "They know," Mira said once we were out of earshot. "Our window just collapsed. We need to get off base now," I agreed, "before they lock it down. My car is at the south lot. If we cut through the training fields, we can reach it without using the main roads." It was, our best option. Moving at a steady jog that wouldn't attract attention, we headed toward the vast open fields used for drills and exercises. The base was large enough that a full perimeter lockdown would take time to implement. Time we desperately needed. As we ran, I mentally inventoried what we had. My father's letter and the digital recording. Mira's financial evidence. Not the complete case my father had built, but enough to open an investigation. Enough to keep his truth alive. If we made it off base. If we reached Denver. If Mira's FBI contact was legitimate. Too many ifs, but no choice now but to move forward. The drive to Denver was a blur of tension and hypervigilance. Every set of headlights a potential threat. Every mile gained a small victory. Mira drove with focused intensity, taking back roads where possible, maintaining a speed that wouldn't attract attention but put maximum distance between us and Camp Valor. "Your father was a legend, you know," she said after we'd been driving for nearly an hour, the dark landscape rushing past our windows. "Not just for the medals or the missions, for his integrity." I glanced over, surprised by the personal turn. "You knew him?" "Not directly, but my brother served under him in Afghanistan. Said Major Whitmore was the only officer who never asked his men to take risks he wouldn't take himself." She paused. "When I heard you'd been assigned to Camp Valor, I requested transfer there. Thought maybe some of that Whitmore integrity might have rubbed off." The admission settled something in my chest. A doubt I hadn't fully acknowledged. "That's why you've helped me all this time." "That? And I hate corrupt officers who think they're untouchable." Her grip tightened on the steering wheel. "Men like Rawlins and Stein give the rest of us a bad name." We fell silent again, each lost in our thoughts as the miles accumulated. I checked my phone. No service, as expected. I'd removed the battery as we'd left base, aware that modern military could track phones even when powered down. "Almost there," Mira announced as the distant glow of Denver appeared on the horizon. "My contact will meet us at a safe house first. Verify what we have before taking it official." "And you trust this person completely?" I had to ask again, the betrayal by Stein still fresh. "With my life," she replied without hesitation. "And more, importantly, with yours." The safe house turned out to be a modest apartment in a nondescript building on Denver's outskirts. No doorman, minimal security cameras, the kind of place where residents minded their own business. "Wait here," Mira instructed as she parked in a side alley. "I'll make sure everything's clear." I watched her disappear into the building, my hand resting on my concealed sidearm. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Just as anxiety began to peak, my phone, now reassembled, buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "All clear. Apartment 3B. Use stairs." The building's interior matched its exterior. Functional, anonymous, slightly worn. I took the stairs quickly, alert for any sign of danger. At apartment 3B, I knocked the pattern Mira and I had agreed upon. 3 quick taps, pause, 2 more. The door opened immediately, revealing not just Mira, but a tall, serious-faced woman with short gray hair and the unmistakable bearing of federal law enforcement. "Lieutenant Whitmore," she greeted me, extending her hand. "Special Agent Catherine Vasquez, FBI, please come in quickly." The apartment was sparsely furnished, but clearly a working space rather than a residence. Multiple laptops sat open on a dining table, and one wall was covered with what appeared to be case files and photographs. "Rodriguez has briefed me on the situation," Vasquez said, gesturing for me to sit. "I need to see what evidence you have before we proceed." I hesitated briefly, years of military caution making me reluctant to surrender our only leverage. "Claire," Mira said gently, "this is why we came. Kate has been investigating geotech for over a year, independently of the military chain of command." That detail tipped the balance. I withdrew my father's letter and the recorder from my inner pocket, placing them on the table. "There's more," I explained as Vasquez carefully unfolded the letter. Complete files documenting fraudulent contracts, falsified safety certifications, bribery. But Stein has those now. This is your father's handwriting? Vasquez confirmed, studying the letter. Yes, and his voice on the recording. It documents an explicit threat from Captain Rawlins, made weeks before my father's accident. Vasquez pressed play, listening intently as the damning conversation unfolded. When it finished, she immediately reached for her phone. I'm activating a team, she said, already dialing. This, combined with what we already have on geotech, is enough for warrants. She paused, looking directly at me. Lieutenant, I want to be clear. Once this machinery starts moving, it doesn't stop. There will be significant blowback against military leadership. Your career? My career doesn't matter, I interrupted. My father died for this truth. Others too. Probably. Making it known is all that matters now. She nodded once, respect evident in her expression, then turned her attention to the call. Within minutes, she was issuing rapid-fire directives to what sounded like a substantial task force. Simultaneous execution of search warrants at Camp Valor, Geotech headquarters, and residential locations for Rawlins, Stein, and 6 other officers. Yes, full electronic seizure protocols. No, they're flight risks. I want them secured immediately. The lieutenant will provide detailed statements once we have the principals in custody. As she continued organizing what was clearly becoming a major operation, Mira drew me aside. You did it, she said quietly. Your father would be proud. We did it, I corrected her. I wouldn't have made it this far without you. She smiled slightly. Team effort, but your stubbornness was the catalyst. Pure Whitmore determination. Lieutenant, Vasquez called, ending her call. We move in 3 hours, coordinated raids at first light. I need you to brief my tactical teams on Camp Valor's layout and security protocols. Can you do that? Yes, ma'am, I replied automatically. Military training taking. Over. Good. Because taking down General Stein and Captain Rawlins on their own turf won't be easy. They'll have contingencies, loyalists ready to impede us. And they may already know we've left base, Mira added grimly. Vasquez's expression hardened. All the more reason to move decisively. Lieutenant Whitmore, I want every detail you can provide about the command structure, who might be involved, and who might help us once we're on site. For the next 2 hours, I worked with Vasquez's team, outlining Camp Valor's security systems, identifying potential allies and threats, creating detailed building schematics from memory. All the while, more agents arrived, equipment was distributed, and a comprehensive assault plan took shape. Throughout this whirlwind of activity, one thought remained constant. After 3 years, justice for my father was finally within reach. Not just for him, but for everyone affected by Geotech's fraudulent practices and the officers who enabled them. You should try to rest, Vasquez suggested around 4 a.m., as preparations reached their final stages. Once we move, things will happen very quickly. Rest seemed impossible, but I recognized the wisdom in her advice. I found a quiet corner of the apartment and closed my eyes, not expecting sleep to come. Yet it did, a testament to the exhaustion of the past 24 hours. I dreamed of my father, not as I'd last seen him in his casket, but as he'd been in life, strong, principled, with that quiet smile that appeared only when he was truly proud. You did good, Claire Bear, he seemed to say. You did real good. Mira's hand on my shoulder woke me. It's time, she said simply. Outside, a convoy of unmarked vehicles awaited. Vasquez approached, now dressed in tactical gear with FBI clearly marked on her vest. Lieutenant Whitmore, you'll ride with me, she said, her manner professional but kind. I want you there when we take them into custody, but you stay behind the entry team. Understood? Yes, ma'am. Rodriguez, you're with Team 2. Your knowledge of the communications hub will be essential if they attempt to lock down systems. As dawn broke on the eastern horizon, our convoy moved out. The 3-hour drive back to Camp Valor passed in tense silence. I found myself mentally reviewing every step of this journey, from that humiliating ceremony to the discovery of Chen's evidence, from the safe deposit box to our midnight escape. So many moments where everything could have gone differently, where I might have given up or looked away. 2 minutes to the main gate, the driver announced as Camp Valor's perimeter came into view. Vasquez keyed her radio. All teams, execute on my mark. Remember, primary targets are Stein and Rawlins. Secure them first, then evidence preservation. 3, 2, 1. Execute. What followed was organized chaos. Our vehicles bypassed the main gate, instead breaching the perimeter at predetermined points. Tactical teams deployed with military precision. Ironic, given we were raiding a military installation. Loudspeakers announced FBI presence and the execution of federal warrants as teams moved toward specific buildings. Our team headed directly for the officers' quarters, where Stein maintained an on-base residence. The raid had clearly caught them by surprise. We encountered minimal resistance as agents secured the building. General's apartment breached, came the report over the radio. Suspect not present. Repeat, Stein is not in his quarters. Check his office, I suggested immediately. He often works through the night. Vasquez redirected a team to the administration building while we continued clearing the officers' quarters. Minutes later, another voice crackled over the radio. We have Rawlins in custody, attempting to destroy evidence in his quarters. Evidence secured. One down. But Stein's absence troubled me. Had he anticipated this? Was he already gone? My answer came moments later as we approached the administration building. A commotion near the helicopter pad caught our attention. A lone figure running toward the base's UH-60 Blackhawk, already spooling up for takeoff. That's Stein, I shouted, recognizing his distinctive gait even from a distance. All units converge on the helipad, Vasquez ordered sharply. Suspect Stein attempting to flee via aircraft. Our vehicle veered sharply, cutting across the parade grounds as other teams redirected toward the helipad. We wouldn't make it in time. The helicopter was already lifting, Stein visible in the pilot's seat. But then, something unexpected. The helicopter lurched sideways, settling back onto the pad with a heavy thud. Through the morning haze, I could make out another figure in the cockpit, struggling with Stein for control. Someone's in there with him, I reported, straining to see more clearly as our vehicle skidded to a halt at the helipad perimeter. Tactical teams deployed, weapons trained on the now disabled helicopter. The door slid open, and a familiar figure emerged, hands raised to show he wasn't armed. Sergeant David Chen. He was trying to leave with the evidence, Chen shouted over the dying whine of the rotors. I disabled the collective. As agents moved in to secure Stein, I approached Chen, incredulous. How did you know? I didn't, he admitted. But when the FBI showed up, I figured someone had finally listened to you. I've been watching Stein for weeks, waiting for him to make a mistake. When the alarms went off, I guessed he'd head for the quickest exit. Stein was led, past us in handcuffs. His previously imposing figure somehow diminished now. He paused briefly as he saw me. Your father was a fool, he said, voice cold despite his circumstances. He could have been part of something lucrative, something bigger than his precious honor. Instead, he chose to die for principles. I met his gaze steadily. Those principles are why his name will be remembered with respect, while yours will only be remembered with disgrace. He had no response to that, and the agents continued leading him toward the waiting vehicles. As the sun rose fully over Camp Valor, illuminating the controlled chaos of the FBI operation, I felt a weight lifting, not just from my shoulders, but from my heart. The truth was out. The conspirators were in custody. My father's legacy was secure. Lieutenant Whitmore, Vasquez approached, removing her tactical helmet. We've secured all primary targets and significant evidence. Geotech's CEO was apprehended simultaneously in Chicago. It's over. Not quite over, I knew. There would be statements to give, trials to testify in, a long process of justice working its way through both civilian and military courts. But the hardest part, the fight for truth against those who would bury it, was indeed finished. What happens now? I asked, watching as agents cataloged evidence removed from Stein's helicopter. Now, Vasquez replied, you help us build an airtight case. And then, Lieutenant, you decide what kind of officer you want to be in a military that will be undergoing significant leadership changes. I thought about that as I gazed across the base, this place where I'd experienced both humiliation and vindication, where my father's memory had been both dishonored and ultimately redeemed. The kind my father would be proud of, I answered simply. The kind who remembers that honor isn't measured in medals, but in the courage to stand for what's right, even when no one is watching. Vasquez nodded, understanding in her eyes. Your father chose his legacy well, Lieutenant Whitmore. Now it's your turn to build on it. As the morning light strengthened across Camp Valor, I felt my father's presence more strongly than I had since his death. Not as a ghost or a memory, but as a foundation upon which I could now build something worthy of his sacrifice. The path ahead would be challenging. The military I served, forever changed by these revelations. But for the first time in 3 years, that path was clear. and I was ready to walk it with the same integrity that had defined Major Thomas Whitmore. Not just as his daughter, but as an officer who understood that true honor comes not from accolades or advancement, but from the quiet certainty of doing what's right, regardless of personal cost. In the end, that was my father's greatest legacy, and now it was mine to carry forward. Epilogue 1 year later. The ceremony was smaller than the previous one. No grand hall, no full battalion in attendance. Just a modest gathering in the Pentagon's memorial courtyard, where those who had truly known and respected Major Thomas Whitmore came to witness the formal posthumous awarding of his distinguished Service Cross. I stood at attention in my dress uniform, now bearing the rank of captain, as the Secretary of the Army read the citation detailing my father's extraordinary heroism during the Kandahar extraction. The words were a fitting tribute, but they couldn't capture the full measure of the man, the father who had taught me to make my bed with military precision, the officer who had led from the front, the whistleblower who had sacrificed everything to expose corruption that endangered his fellow soldiers. As the secretary pinned the cross to the display case that would eventually reside in the military museum, I caught Mira's eye in the front row. Now Lieutenant Rodriguez, her promotion fast-tracked after her role in exposing the geotech conspiracy, she gave me a small, proud nod. Beside her sat David Chen, now a warrant officer specializing in aviation maintenance, a position that recognized both his technical skills and his moral courage. The three of us had formed an unbreakable bond during the months of investigations, hearings, and trials that followed the raids. Those trials had sent shockwaves through military and defense contracting communities. General Stein, Captain Rawlins, and 6 other officers received sentences ranging from 20 years to life imprisonment for crimes including conspiracy, fraud, and murder. Geotech's CEO and 3 executives faced similar fates in federal prison. The company itself was dissolved, its assets seized and directed toward rectifying the dangerous infrastructure issues their fraud had created. More importantly, the case had sparked a comprehensive review of defense contracting procedures across all military branches. New oversight protocols, whistleblower protections, and transparency requirements were implemented, changes that would save lives and billions in taxpayer dollars. After the ceremony concluded and the attendees dispersed, I remained in the courtyard, staring at the display case containing my father's medal and photograph. He would have hated all this attention, came a voice from behind me. I turned to find Sergeant Vasquez, now Special Agent in Charge Vasquez after her promotion following the successful prosecution. Without a doubt, I agreed with a small smile. He was never comfortable in the spotlight, but he would have been proud of the changes his sacrifice made possible, she added, moving to stand beside me. And incredibly proud of you, Captain Whitmore. I nodded, emotion threatening to breach my carefully maintained composure. I hope so. I know so. She paused, studying me. Have you decided yet about the task force position? The offer had come 2 weeks earlier. Leadership of a new joint military FBI task force focused on defense procurement integrity, reporting directly to the Inspector General, a position that would allow me to continue my father's work on a larger scale. I'm accepting, I confirmed. I submit my formal response tomorrow. Good. Satisfaction colored her tone. We need officers with your perspective and your courage. After Vasquez departed, I found myself alone with my father's memorial. I reached out, touching the glass case lightly. I did it, Dad, I said softly. Not just for you, but for everything you stood for everyone who serves with honor and expects the same from their leaders. The courtyard remained silent, but in that silence, I felt a sense of completion. A circle closed, a promise fulfilled. As I finally turned to leave, I noticed a young lieutenant watching from across the courtyard, her expression a mixture of uncertainty and determination that I recognized all too well. She straightened as our eyes met, offering a precise salute. I returned it with equal precision, then made my way toward her. Whatever challenges she faced, whatever injustices she was navigating, perhaps I could help, just as Chen and Mira had helped me, just as my father had guided me even after his death. Because that was the true meaning of legacy, not just honors on a wall or medals in a case, but the continuation of principles passed from one generation to the next. The ongoing commitment to integrity, to truth, to the belief that how we serve matters as much as what we achieve. My father had taught me that. And now it was my turn to teach others.